Our traditions do not determine the future of our children, but the will of God. And never you allow your traditions to overshadow God's will for your children. And this is demonstrated in Luke's Gospel chapter 1 from verse 57 to 66. The story of Zachariah, his wife Elizabeth, and the gifts of child that God gave them, with their kinsmen who were trying to bring about influence in what should the child be called. God had already instructed that the child must be called John, because he alone knows the plan he has for that child. But the kinsmen were saying nobody in their family bears the name John. It is not in their tradition for the child to be called John. Rather, the child must be called Zachariah after his father. But thank God for the life of Elizabeth, Zachariah's wife, who insisted that the child must be called John, because this is the instruction of God, because this is the will of God for the child. This does not only happen when it comes to naming ceremony. We see this happening every day in our society, where parents will say over our dead body for our son to marry a woman from this community or from this tribe or even from this family. Families say over our dead body for our daughter to be married into that family or into this family. What if that is the will of God for your child, and yet you are saying your tradition does not allow your children to be married into that family or to marry from that family? What if that is the will of God for them? When we allow our traditions to overshadow God's will for our children, then their future is likely to be problematic. When we allow our traditions to overshadow God's will for us, then can we see that the blessings that is meant for us will not be there? And this was the situation even with Zachariah, because he wanted to allow the tradition of his people to overshadow God's will for him. God made him mute and told him that until the day he is ready to obey his voice, he will never gain his speech. And his wife insisted that the child must be called John at the instruction of God. And when Zachariah wrote it down that the child should be called John, that was when he gained back his speech. God can decide to take his blessings from us. He can decide to make our lives stagnant when we allow our traditions to take precedence over his will. This is why Peter will say to the Jews in Acts chapter 5 verse 29, "It is better to obey God than men, because disobedience is witchcraft. It takes away the blessings of God in our lives." So we must be sensitive to this very fact, and I pray for such grace through Christ our Lord.